Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos and welcome to This Week in Mythic Plus. This week's affixes are Tyrannical, Raging, Explosive, and of course Prideful. This week is one of the better Tyrannical weeks on the calendar for the purposes of being a week where people can potentially push some keys. We haven't seen the highest level keys really being competitive on Tyrannical even after they did that Tyrannical nerfing it down to 30% increased boss health from 40, and my suspicion is we're still not going to see any of that, but this will probably be one of the weeks where people come the closest, because for really high level keys, a lot of Tyrannical weeks are actually like hot garbage. You'll notice that 2 of the 6 Tyrannical weeks have bolstering active on them, 2 have necrotic active, 1, which is in 2 weeks, has both of those. And so you're really left with only a couple of Tyrannical weeks that have no really tough affixes, and this is one of them. Raging, Explosive, Tyrannical. It's a really good combination of affixes for a lot of groups, for especially if you're looking to farm some Valor. This is going to be a great week to do that, because Explosive really doesn't do too much of anything this expansion pack. Pretty much anybody, just hit one of them with any global. There are a couple of boss fights where you're going to want to be careful. Ooh, finished an adventure table mission. Love to see that. A couple of boss fights where you're going to want to be careful of Explosive, namely anytime you have something like CC'd off to the side. If you CC something with like Sap or Imprison, it won't spawn explosives, but pretty much anything else, it will spawn explosives if it gets in combat with you, and pretty much any boss mobs, if they're CC'd, will spawn explosives as well. So you gotta be careful with stuff like Plaguefall. This boss, if you're gonna CC a slime, which is a little sketch. I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you've got a lot of damage relative to your key level, but if you're trying to CC a purple slime off on the last platform and just not deal with it the whole fight, you've got something like a Druid with Mass Roots that you're running in this dungeon, which is really good in this dungeon for a lot of different parts. That is something you're going to need to watch out for, those sorts of things, spawning explosives. Actually, Plaguefall is a really good example where there's several boss fights where explosive can potentially be a problem, like first boss as well. If you've got slimes CC'd in a similar fashion there, you could get yourself in some trouble. So you do need to watch out for that, but the good news is anybody can notice them and throw one global, and they pretty much will always go down. So not too much of a problem there. The Raging affix, also not one of the harder ones this expansion. Any hunters, druids, or rogues can soothe it off. They do need to have that ability bound, which not all of them do. Or not all of them are always willing to press it, but if they are, it can be really helpful whenever you have like one mini-boss style enemy enter Raging, because when mobs are Raging, they do double damage. So they actually hit harder than they would on like a Fortified week by a lot when they are enraged on Tyrannical week, so you do need to be really careful of that. It's a good time to kite at the end of a pack this week rather than at the start of a pack, obviously you wouldn't kite at the start of a pack, but it's good to use your AoE CC effects at the end rather than the start of a pull, which is sometimes groups will go in and stun right off the bat. This is a week where you may want to consider doing it at the end of the pull rather than the start of the pull. And the main time that Raging is going to get you in trouble is when there's lots of hard-hitting enemies and not just one. Because when there's one, you can have somebody soothe it, or you can CC that one enemy. When there's like 5 medium to hard-hitting enemies all entering Raging range at once, that's when your tank needs to get out of there. And if you do that this week, otherwise, shouldn't be too difficult, shouldn't pose too many problems. There are a couple of pain points that I want to point out. I'm not going to go full in-depth dungeon by dungeon this week, except to mention, of course, that all my routes are available on Raider.io every week. They are basically the same as last week. They're all pretty stable at this point, although the one thing I have changed, Halls of Atonement's route with skips. I've set it up to get prides onto both of the first 2 bosses now. So that is something I'm going to alternate between the Tyrannical and Fortified week routes to set that up. This does require you to do a little skip at the start, though. So you do. Otherwise, it's really annoying to get a 60% pride onto this boss because you're going to spawn it before you get to the 3rd shard, almost always. Anyways, little minor thing there. Let's talk about some other spots where the affixes can get you in trouble. So Raging, one thing that gets a lot of people in trouble is Risen Warlords in the other side. These things have Undying Rage, which is also an enrage effect they'll put on themselves that prevents them from dying for 12 seconds and doubles their damage. So you've got 2 effects doubling their damage when they're about to die, and they don't actually die. if your tank isn't kiting while these mobs have Undying Rage and Raging, your tank is just going to get one shot or close to it. These things really, really, really do not mess around, but they are nice and slow. They are CC immune, but they're nice and slow, so you can run away from them. Also, they send out those little images, the Reavers, that do the whirlwinds and stuff. Those will also scale up based off of their Raging and their Undying Rage, so be very careful of that. It's actually a physical effect, so it depends a little bit on your class how scary this is. Like Boomkins really just tickles them. It'll still be dangerous with Undying Rage and Raging active, but like a Clothy, it's just always going to be very dangerous on, so there's a little tip on how those things work. Let's see, other than that, I don't really have any specific things to point out in dungeons. I guess I have a couple. Let's talk about a couple of them real quick. I'm not going to go full dungeon by dungeon, though, anymore in these videos. I'm going to start condensing them down, moving them into a little bit more of a short and sweet style thing than the 20 minutes they have been previously, because you can go watch the first time I did this combination of affixes now 12 weeks ago, if you're interested in a little bit more about the dungeons, although it's a little bit dated at this point, I will admit. So Mist, you got to watch out actually for the mini bosses, particularly if you end up fighting the dragon. If it's raging when it casts Shred Armor, your tank will disappear. The frog as well. The frog can be a little bit of a pain with tongue lashing, which if this is ever hitting somebody who's not your tank, it's a frontal thing that it'll do, and sometimes when it leaps, it can do that on somebody unsuspecting. That can be very deadly as well, so pay extra attention with that area here. And anytime there's healing mobs, you also need to be really careful, because if you let a Staghorn get some of this Stimulate Regeneration off, mobs don't lose the Raging debuff when they go above 30% health. So if that happens, you could have potentially a bunch of mobs at 60% health that still have Raging on them as well. So really, anytime there's healing involved, you need to be extra careful that if it goes off, you're taking extra defensive measures, because the Raging is already out there. Other than that, I don't really have anything for these middle dungeons. The one thing I want to mention, the Theater of Pain, these duelists do not mess around when they are enraged. You can't CC them either, so you can save some cooldowns for the end of their lives. Or, I mean, at a high key level, things are just going to get extremely sketchy this week. If you're interested in the with skips route, somebody sent in somebody called Clear Comms, spelled in a way different than you would expect, sent in some ways that you could enter these rooms at specific times to fight the easier of the two enemies. So do check that out if you're interested. That is something you can force. They're still, even the weaker of these two duelists is often pretty sketchy when raging, so really do look to save damaging cooldowns for the end of these pulls rather than the start. Kind of always a good idea with any mini-boss style enemies. There's a couple of AoE effects in this dungeon as well that if they're going off when mobs are raging will potentially kill you very quickly, so always got to be really careful of those. But the good news is, beyond that, the explosive affix is pretty free. Tyrannical actually feels better than Fortified in a lot of cases, depending on what key level you're playing at. If you do have designs on, pushing IO, pushing up above 20, pushing up to 23s, 24s, whatever, that kind of stuff, that's where you'll really start feeling the Tyrannical, putting a huge brake on your train. But other than that, this is actually a really great week to secure some Valor points, blast some keys. It can actually be a lot more fun in like a 15 key environment to have Tyrannical active and you actually have long enough to, fight a boss for a little while and not just have it disappear within 30 seconds and the Pride. Although with Prideful, depending on what classes you're playing, the bosses can still melt really fast. So yeah, that's a look at these dungeons this week. Hope you liked the video. Hope there was something in here useful for you. Do share your tips in the comments below. And if I see any good ones, I'll maybe hit them with that YouTube heart thing or pin them or something. I don't know. I'm not very good at doing that, but I'll try my best. Come check out my stream, twitch.tv/Ratnos. Hit like and all that stuff. Thanks everyone for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.